I installed a tool last month that I had been ignoring for years. Not because I didn't know it existed, but because I assumed it was the kind of thing enthusiasts use to make their computers look like anime screensavers. I was wrong. Within 48 hours of installing Windhawk, I had fixed 3 Windows 11 problems that Microsoft has refused to address for years. Within a week, I had transformed how I interact with my computer at a fundamental level, and now, sitting here looking at a friend's unmodified Windows 11 machine, I genuinely cannot believe I used to work like that every single day. This is the story of what changed and why it changed everything. Let's start with an honest description of the frustration that drove this experiment, because understanding the problem makes the solution considerably more meaningful. Windows 11 is, by 2026, a better operating system than it was when it launched in 2021. Microsoft has genuinely improved it in numerous areas over those 5 years, and several of those improvements have been significant. But there is a specific category of frustration that Windows 11 has never adequately addressed, a category that falls in the space between things that are technically broken and things that are entirely a matter of personal preference. This is the space of design decisions that aren't wrong in any objective sense, but that consistently create friction for specific types of users, and that Microsoft shows no indication of being willing to change, because changing them for one group of users would mean disappointing a different group of users. The right-click context menu is the canonical example. When you right-click a file or folder in Windows 11, you get a clean, abbreviated menu with common actions and rounded corners that fits the visual language of the rest of the operating system. If you want to access the full range of options that you need for less common tasks, including options added by applications you've installed, you must click a small Show More Options link at the bottom of that menu to see an expanded version. Microsoft made this decision deliberately to simplify the most common interaction scenario, and the visual result does look cleaner than the old dense right-click menu. But for a power user who navigates complex file operations throughout the workday, that extra click is not a minor inconvenience. It is an interruption that happens dozens of times per hour, that breaks workflow rhythm, that takes cognitive resources away from actual work, and directs them toward navigating a navigation menu. The Windows 11 interface offers improved customization in many areas, but it still has limits. You can change the background image, switch themes, adjust accent colors, and reorganize parts of the Start menu and Taskbar. However, for bigger changes, like restoring classic features, modifying system behaviors, or reshaping the interface, native options quickly run out. The white flash problem is a second, more visually dramatic example that affects specifically the enormous number of Windows 11 users who have enabled dark mode because they prefer a darker visual environment. In dark mode, File Explorer is supposed to present a consistently dark interface. In practice, navigating between folders in File Explorer produces a brief flash of white background before each new folder's contents load. This happens because File Explorer in Windows 11 is a hybrid application, built from a combination of old Win32 code and newer WinUI 3 components that Microsoft has been progressively adding over the past several years. The hybrid rendering, where the system must coordinate between a CPU-based Win32 rendering pipeline and a GPU-based modern rendering pipeline simultaneously, is what produces the flash. Microsoft has acknowledged this and is actively working to fix it through its ongoing WinUI 3 migration project, which is rebuilding the older components in the modern framework. But that migration takes time. It is a deeply complex architectural undertaking, and in the meantime, users who work in dark mode are living with a visual jolt every time they navigate anywhere in their file system. These are the kinds of problems that sit in the zone between deal breaker and acceptable nuisance for most users, but that slowly accumulate over a workday into a meaningful drag on productivity and satisfaction. And they are precisely the problems that Windhawk was built to address, without requiring users to wait for Microsoft's own development cycle, without requiring any modification to core system files, and without replacing the Windows shell entirely with something that doesn't behave like Windows anymore. So what is Windhawk exactly, and why is the approach it takes genuinely different from the Windows tweaking and customization tools that have existed for decades before it? Windhawk is a Windows customization platform that lets you install small, focused mods to change how parts of the operating system behave. Instead of replacing the Windows shell or installing a large, all-in-one tweaking suite, Windhawk applies targeted changes to specific areas, such as the taskbar, Start menu, File Explorer, window controls, tray icons, and desktop behavior. This modular philosophy, where each change is a separate, isolated mod that can be installed, configured, or removed independently, is the architectural choice that makes Windhawk meaningfully different from its predecessors and competitors. The tools that have historically served the Windows customization audience each specialize in a different dimension of the problem. Rainmeter, if you've encountered it, is excellent for adding visual overlays and widgets to your desktop, system monitors, and clocks and weather displays floating over your background. Power Toys, Microsoft's own collection of productivity editions, focuses on workflow efficiency features like a color picker, a window layout manager, a file renaming tool, and similar utilities. Winero Tweaker digs into hidden Windows settings and registry values that Microsoft doesn't expose through the standard interface. These are all legitimate, useful tools that serve real needs, but none of them does what Windhawk does: modify the actual runtime behavior of Windows interface components at a code level in an isolated, updatable, community-maintained way. The distinction between Windhawk's approach and the older approach of registry hacks and file replacements is the safety dimension that makes Windhawk appropriate for users who want customization without accepting meaningful risk. Traditional Windows customization, the kind documented in forum posts with titles like "How to Restore the Classic Start Menu," typically involves finding a specific registry key, changing its value, and hoping that a future Windows update doesn't overwrite that change or cause a conflict that produces unexpected behavior. File replacement approaches, where you substitute a Microsoft system file with a modified version, are even riskier because they can produce conflicts with Windows Update and occasionally break the operating system in ways that require a repair installation. Windhawk takes neither of these approaches. Each mod is community-created code that modifies the behavior of Windows interface components through a different mechanism, one that is significantly more update-resistant because it doesn't depend on specific registry, key values, or file contents that Microsoft might change in any update. Windows updates are notorious for breaking favorite desktop customization tools. Windhawk is specifically noted in the community for being more update-stable than alternatives, precisely because each mod is isolated and targeted rather than being a wholesale shell replacement. Version 1.7, released December 5th, 2025, is the current version of Windhawk and brought several improvements that made the platform notably better than it had been before. The single most impactful change for users was the shift to downloading pre-compiled mods rather than compiling them on the user's machine. Prior to this change, installing a Windhawk mod required the mod to be compiled from source code on your computer during installation, a process that could take several seconds or longer depending on the complexity of the mod and the speed of your machine. With precompiled mods, installation is significantly faster, bringing the mod installation experience closer to the instant gratification you get from installing an app from a mobile app store. The same update added a one-click self-update mechanism from the About tab, eliminating the previously slightly clunky process of downloading and running an update manually, and expanded language support to include Arabic, Hindi, and Thai, reflecting the genuinely global user base that Windhawk has developed. Now, let's get into the specific mods that actually produced the I Can't Go Back experience that this video's title describes, because the abstract description of what Windhawk does is considerably less compelling than walking through exactly what changes, specifically, produce the transformation that makes an unmodified Windows 11 machine feel incomplete by comparison. The first thing I installed was the classic context menu restoration. As described earlier, Windows 11's right-click menu shows an abbreviated set of options, by default, requiring an extra click to access the full menu. The Windhawk mod that restores the classic behavior doesn't require any registry editing, doesn't modify any system files, it doesn't risk creating conflicts with future updates. You install it through the Windhawk interface, it applies its targeted modification to the relevant Windows component. And from that moment forward, right-clicking anything in File Explorer or on the desktop produces the full, complete context menu that Windows 10 users were accustomed to without the extra clicks. The restoration of that single interaction, one click saved dozens of times per hour, sounds trivial until you experience the cumulative effect of its absence for a full workday, and then its presence the following day. The workflow rhythm that was quietly being interrupted several times per minute is simply there, unbroken, because the friction point is gone. The second installation was the File Explorer white flash fix, and this one had an immediately visible impact that was hard to ignore. Before the mod, navigating between folders in dark mode produced a brief but noticeable white flash with each navigation action. After the mod, the white flash was eliminated. The folder navigation became visually consistent with the dark mode environment I had configured, and the jarring interruption to the dark interface disappeared entirely. This is, technically, fixing a bug that Microsoft has acknowledged and is working to fix through its WinUI 3 migration project. But the key difference is that Windhawk users get the fix today, working within the current hybrid Win32 WinUI architecture, rather than waiting for Microsoft's architectural migration to reach the specific components responsible for producing the flash. The mod doesn't rewrite the File Explorer codebase. It applies a targeted fix that addresses the symptom in the current environment, which is exactly what you want when the alternative is living with a visually disruptive bug for an indeterminate amount of time while Microsoft's migration progresses at its own pace. The third mod category that fundamentally changed my daily experience was the taskbar information customization, specifically through the taskbar clock customization mod, which was updated to its own version 1.7 in December 2025, alongside the core Windhawk platform update. The standard Windows taskbar clock displays the time and date in a small area at the bottom right of the screen. It has done this in essentially the same way since early versions of Windows, and the information density it provides is fixed by Microsoft's design decisions. The taskbar clock customization mod does not simply let you choose a different time format. It transforms that small corner of your screen into a genuinely information-rich display that can show whatever combination of system metrics and personal information is most relevant to your workflow. The V1.7 update introduced more system performance metrics patterns, including GPU usage, battery details, disk I/O, transfer rate, and media player information, including title, artist, album, and playback status. What this means in practice, for a user who has the mod configured to their preferences, is that the clock area of the taskbar becomes a live dashboard showing the information that matters most for their specific situation. A developer who needs to monitor system performance while running resource-intensive builds can see CPU, GPU, and RAM usage at a glance without opening Task Manager. A laptop user can see their battery status and discharge rate directly in the taskbar clock. A music listener can see what is currently playing, including track title and artist, without switching to the media player window. The information is always visible, always current, and displayed in a format and style that the user has configured to their own preferences, including custom font colors to improve readability against different taskbar backgrounds. The standard Windows clock is barely visible in the bottom right corner and doesn't stand out. One user review describes the transformation perfectly. I changed the byline color to make it more eye-catching and adjusted the font size and style and character spacing to my preferences. This wasn't a feature I thought I needed, but I can't do without it after setting my preferred configuration. I think it's incredible how one minor tweak can have a compound effect, helping me save a significant amount of time. That observation, one minor tweak with a compound effect, captures something important about the Windhawk experience that pure feature list comparisons miss. None of the individual changes described here are dramatic. None of them add entirely new capabilities that were previously impossible. They each address a specific existing friction point in the Windows interface and eliminate it. But the compound effect of eliminating multiple friction points simultaneously produces an experience that feels qualitatively different from the starting state. Not because any single thing is dramatically better, but because dozens of small interruptions and inefficiencies have been removed from an experience that previously contained all of them. When you then look at a machine without these modifications, you notice those friction points in a way you hadn't before installing the mods, because your calibration for what a smooth Windows experience should feel like has been reset by the experience of actually having one. The File Explorer improvements beyond the white flash fix deserve their own dedicated attention, because File Explorer is one of the most frequently used components of the entire Windows environment, and the Windhawk mods targeting it address several categories of genuine limitation. The better file sizes in Explorer Details mod changes how file sizes are displayed in the Details view of File Explorer. By default, Windows rounds file sizes to the nearest kilobyte, megabyte, or gigabyte, and displays them in a format that prioritizes clean appearance over precision. The mod changes this display to show more accurate size information, which is practically useful for anyone who regularly works with files near storage limits, compares file sizes for verification purposes, or needs to make informed decisions about which files to archive based on their actual space consumption. Like the classic context menu, this sounds like a minor detail until you've had accurate file sizes for a week, and then return to a machine showing the default rounded display, at which point the lack of precision becomes immediately apparent. The desktop icon spacing mod addresses a different File Explorer adjacent customization that Windows has stubbornly refused to expose through its native interface. The spacing between icons on the Windows desktop has been fixed at values determined by Microsoft since Windows 7, with no supported way to adjust it through normal Windows settings. Users who prefer a more compact desktop with more icons visible, or who prefer more generous spacing for easier visual targeting on high-resolution displays, have historically had to use registry hacks that could be reset by Windows updates. The Windhawk mod provides this control through its standard mod configuration interface, making it adjustable, persistent across updates, and easily reversible if desired. The per-monitor Alt+Tab behavior modification is another mod that addresses a specific Windows 11 limitation that affects users working with multiple monitors. Windows 11's Alt+Tab task switcher shows all open windows across all monitors by default, which is useful for users who want to see everything at once, but creates a navigation burden for users with many windows open across multiple monitors who primarily want to switch between windows on the current monitor. The Windhawk mod allows per monitor Alt plus Tab behavior, meaning pressing Alt plus Tab cycles through the windows on the monitor where your cursor is located, rather than presenting the full cross-monitor window list. For a user who works with two monitors containing different workflows, this change transforms Alt plus Tab from a navigation through the entire open window collection into a workflow-specific switcher that respects the spatial organization of work across multiple displays. The Smoother Tab and Taskbar cycling modification addresses the experience of using keyboard shortcuts to cycle through open applications and browser tabs, which can feel sluggish or visually jarring in the default Windows 11 implementation. The mod provides a smoother cycling experience with improved visual feedback that makes the transition feel more responsive and polished. This falls into the category of changes that are difficult to describe in text, but immediately noticeable in practice because they affect the perceived responsiveness and polish of interactions that happen many times per hour throughout a working day. Let's address the safety and practical considerations directly, because any honest discussion of a third-party Windows customization tool must include an honest assessment of the risks and the precautions that responsible use requires. Windhawk is known to be a safe application, but it is still a third-party tool that is not supported by Microsoft. Creating a full backup before installing Windhawk and before adding individual mods is a genuinely necessary precaution rather than optional boilerplate advice. Mods could be potentially disruptive, and they sometimes have a steeper learning curve when it comes to personalization. Before using any mods, back up important data to make sure you can recover your stuff should the unexpected happen. The modular architecture of Windhawk means that a problem with one mod should not cascade into system-wide instability, because each mod is isolated from the others. If a specific mod causes unexpected behavior, disabling or removing that mod should restore the pre-mod behavior without affecting anything else. This isolation is one of the meaningful architectural advantages Windhawk has over more invasive customization approaches. But it doesn't make Windhawk risk-free, and the backup recommendation exists because edge cases can produce unexpected interactions, particularly when mods interact with Windows components that were themselves modified by a recent Windows update. The update story for Windhawk mods is also worth understanding clearly because it's where the update-resistant characterization requires some nuance. Windhawk mods are more update-resistant than registry hacks or file replacements, but more resistant doesn't mean completely immune. A Windows update that significantly changes the implementation of a component that a mod modifies may require the mod to be updated to remain compatible. The community nature of Windhawk's mod ecosystem means that popular mods generally receive updates relatively quickly when Windows changes break them, but the timeline depends on the availability and attention of the specific mod's developer. Checking after significant Windows updates whether your active mods are still functioning correctly is a reasonable part of the Windhawk maintenance routine. The Windhawk ecosystem in 2026 is meaningfully more mature than it was in its earlier years, with hundreds of available mods in the marketplace covering every major area of the Windows interface. The mod description images now load from GitHub rather than third-party image hosting services, and the Allicence and Addinate URL metadata. Fields added in version 1.7 make it easier for mod developers to be recognized and supported for their work. This ecosystem maturity matters for users who are evaluating Windhawk for the first time, because a larger, healthier mod ecosystem means more options, more active maintenance, and more community documentation to help with configuration choices. Now let's talk about the broader context that makes Windhawk particularly relevant specifically in 2026, because the timing of this tool's growth as a mainstream consideration is not coincidental. Throughout 2025, Windows 11's reputation for reliability suffered significantly. Multiple updates broke significant functionality. Microsoft's president of Windows published a public acknowledgement that things had gone wrong. The operating system earned unflattering nicknames in online communities. And simultaneously, Microsoft's design decisions continued to push the interface in directions that prioritized AI integration and cloud service promotion over the desktop workflow preferences of users who simply wanted their computer to work efficiently and without interruption. Windhawk represents a specific response to this situation that is distinct from the more dramatic response of switching to Linux. It says, I want to stay on Windows because Windows is where my applications are and where my workflows live, but I want Windows on my terms rather than exclusively on Microsoft's terms. Windows updates are notorious for breaking your favorite desktop customization tools. Windhawk's positioning as the most stable, powerful, and safe approach to Windows customization speaks directly to users who have been burned by earlier customization tools that stopped working after an update, and who need confidence that their investment in configuring their environment will persist across the normal Windows update cycle. The Windhawk approach also speaks to something that the customization conversation around Windows rarely acknowledges clearly: the difference between wanting a completely different operating system and wanting a better version of the operating system you already have. The users for whom Windhawk is the right tool are not the users who want their Windows machine to look like Mac OS or to run like a Linux shell. They are users who think Windows is fundamentally a good platform, who find genuine value in the Windows application ecosystem and the familiarity of the Windows interface conventions, but who have specific and identifiable frustrations with choices Microsoft has made that they would make differently if they had the option. Windhawk gives them the option in a modular way that lets them address exactly those frustrations without requiring them to accept a wholesale transformation of their computing environment. Let's walk through what an actual Windhawk setup looks like in practice, from installation through first use, because the abstract description of what it does is less useful than a concrete picture of what you actually encounter. The installation begins at the Windhawk website, where you download a standard installer for the Windhawk application itself. Running the installer sets up the Windhawk engine, which is the underlying system that enables mods to function and opens the Windhawk interface. The interface is organized around a marketplace view, where you can browse and search available mods, and an installed view, where you can see and manage the mods you've enabled. Finding a specific mod you want is a matter of searching the marketplace or browsing by category. Selecting a mod shows its description, screenshots, and configuration options. Installing it takes a few seconds, with version 1.7's pre-compiled mod delivery, and the mod becomes active immediately or after a brief system component restart, depending on which component the mod modifies. Configuration options appear within the Windhawk interface for each installed mod, allowing adjustment of behavior without requiring any registry editing or file modification. Removing a mod is as simple as uninstalling it through the same interface, and the Windows component returns to its default behavior. This simplicity of installation and removal is genuinely important for users who are evaluating mods they might not want to keep permanently. The ability to try a mod for a few days, assess its actual impact on daily work, and then easily remove it if it doesn't improve things, means the exploration cost is low. You're not committing to a permanent configuration change when you install a Windhawk mod. You're experimenting with an isolated, reversible modification that you can keep or discard based on actual experience, rather than theoretical assessment of whether it sounds useful. The question this video's title implicitly raises, whether the can't go back feeling is genuinely universal or specific to certain user types, deserves a direct, honest answer. Windhawk is not for every Windows user. If your interaction with Windows is primarily through applications that fill the screen, you rarely interact with the desktop, taskbar, or File Explorer directly, many of Windhawk's most impactful mods will produce minimal improvement in your daily experience. If you use Windows in a managed corporate environment where third-party customization tools are restricted by IT policy, Windhawk isn't an option regardless of how appealing its capabilities might be. Windhawk's impact is most dramatically felt by users who work heavily with File Explorer for complex file management, who use multiple monitors and find default window management conventions inefficient, who work in dark mode and are bothered by the white flash problem, who rely on the taskbar as an information source and want more data visible there, and who find the extra click required by the abbreviated context menu to be a genuine workflow interruption rather than a negligible inconvenience. These are, in 2026, an enormous number of people. But they're not every Windows user, and being honest about that keeps the recommendation appropriately calibrated, rather than overselling a tool as a universal solution. For the users who do fit that profile, though, the experience of using Windhawk for a week and then returning to an unmodified Windows 11 environment is genuinely jarring in the way the title describes. The white flashes return. The abbreviated context menu requires the extra click again. The taskbar clock shows only time and date. The desktop icons snap back to their fixed spacing. And you notice all of these things in a way you never did before the mods existed, because the experience of having them removed has reset your expectation of what using Windows should feel like. The compound effect of multiple small improvements runs in both directions. When you've been without the friction points long enough, the return feels like degradation rather than normalcy, and the motivation to return to the Windhawk configuration is immediate and strong. That irreversibility of expectation, once you've experienced the smoother version, the less interrupted version, the more information-dense version of Windows, is precisely what the can't go back framing captures. It's not that returning to standard Windows is impossible, it's that it feels unnecessarily worse than it needs to be, given that you now know a better version of the same operating system is available through a free tool with a community of thousands of contributors constantly improving it. The Windows you're using right now is one installation away from being considerably more aligned with how you actually want to work. That's the Windhawk proposition, And for users who fit its intended audience, it's a genuinely compelling one.